Okay, welcome to the first SDC address of 2011, and I would like to spend this address going over a Paul Solomon reading that I just read. I'm very slowly, and as I, feel like I want to, going through book 2 of the Paul Solomon readings, which was a free gift from the Paul Solomon Foundation since I helped work on it, I guess, which was really nice. Um, and I'm like this far. So the reading that I'm going over is number 9529, done in Japan. All these are done in Japan. The last two books, pretty much, he apparently spent a fair amount of time in Japan giving readings at the end of his life. So this is reading number 9529, and it was just an individual reading. But the reason that it's important is he outlines a lot of information about how we came into being, our background, our higher self, what is us, what how this really works out in the backstory, so to speak, from the perspective of these deep trance channels. And from what I've read from Cottrell and Casey and whatnot, they all pretty much have the same take, a consistent take on this background. So, but it's said here with more clarity than I think I've read almost anywhere else, in more detail. So I thought it was a terrifically enlightening because of that. So, well, I'll just start it out. I mean, this person asked about it's a lady, and she asked if she's going to meet a man soon and her romantic future and whatnot. But immediately the reading like rabbit trailed, and it says, yes, we have the records here. The movement of the soul through progressive times of growth, incarnation, bonding, and awakening to realizations and soul growth, blah, blah, blah. Now, let us take these questions in just a bit of a different order, that we may establish the manner, means of growth to this point, to discover why the soul has entered into this country, this family, under these circumstances, and having so established, we will then return to the initial question. And by the way, to those of you that aren't familiar with the deep trance process, this happens a lot. I was talking to Douglas Cottrell's son, and he said that, this kind of thing happens all the time, and it even happened in my reading, where you come with a list of questions. They could even be just questions in your mind, but typically people come with a list of questions. The channel doesn't even go over them, and then oftentimes they will answer questions out of turn. You'll ask the first part of a question, they'll answer the whole thing, or they'll answer things you haven't even gotten to yet, and obviously showing an awareness of what's on the page, a full awareness, and even of your intent and stuff like that. So it goes on, it says, this is a soul who was born into self-awareness through the activities of the school called by the ancient manner the Temple Beautiful. Now the words Temple Beautiful and Temple Sacrifice were first coined, to my knowledge, by Edgar Casey, and they appear a lot in his readings. And this is all about Atlantis, and then the offshoot civilization that moved to the Egyptian Empire, what was later to become the Egyptian Kingdom, according to the Casey readings and according to Paul Solomon and I presume the other sources. I just haven't read too many readings on from Cottrell and other deep trance channels on past history and stuff. But anyway, so there was apparently this Temple Beautiful and Temple Sacrifice, and as I'm becoming more familiar with the Urantia Book, now I've read the entire Urantia Book history. That was one of the first things I read, was the history of the Earth, but I read it. It was like a once over, and I will become more familiar with it as I go over it again in my more detailed sweep. But all this time I've been trying to kind of reconcile what the Urantia Book is talking about with what Casey and the others are talking about, the deep trance channels, because on the surface they seem really different. The deep trance channels paint this picture of two different kinds of entities being in human form. Those who came here initially and kind of got trapped here, and then the others that came here just to save those people, and then they got trapped here or something like that. And I don't know. We'll spend more time talking about that down the road, because I think there's a lot to be put together, and I'm getting more inspired about how things do seem to match up. But it really does seem like this civilization of Atlantis, and I think Casey only used that term because of the legends and expectations we already had concerning a civilization, a historic civilization like that. But it really seems like this civilization of Atlantis is one of the downstream groups that that came from the ministry of the planetary prince and or the material son and daughter. So from Caligastia, the guy that sided with Lucifer and then took off and went bad and started poisoning everything like 200,000 years ago, and then according to the Urantia Book, and then the material son and daughter being Adam and Eve started the Garden of Eden. And I can't remember the timeline of the Urantia Book exactly when that was supposed to have happened. A while back, I don't know how many tens of thousands of years, but each of those, when they were working right, each of those would attract a bunch of more qualified, more interested individuals that started here, that were evolutionary mortals on Earth, and then they would bring them to these centers, educational centers, and educate them. And those centers, those educational centers where there was teaching and healing and everything, sound a lot like what Casey claims was going on with these Temple Beautiful and Temple of Sacrifice and stuff. So it really does seem like they're talking about the same thing from two radically different perspectives. So lots more to come there. But anyway, so yeah, this person was apparently associated with the Temple Beautiful. And he goes on to say, now the awakening of a soul to self-awareness refers to the time when the soul first experienced being separated in consciousness from that great single soul, which is the expression of God, God's one child. And yet this one child, this singular expression of God, is something you might view, taking from the Master of Masters and the scribes of the Bible, taking their own analogy, we would use it here in this manner to say that perhaps you could think of God's one child who is characterized by love, life, and the light of enlightenment, and to the extent that these energies exist, they exist as the very nature, character of God's one child. And using the ancient rabbinical analogy, you may see this one child as if it were a desert or a seashore with so many billions of grains of sand. Now, we use that analogy, that metaphor, because it was used by the ancients, particularly in speaking to Abraham, that his lineage would be as the number of grains of sand within a desert or seashore. Thus, if you consider the desert one, and the multitude of cells or expressions within that one, then there is originally in soul consciousness a relationship only with the one desert itself as one whole. And there is no consciousness at all of a grain of sand within that great body being a singular expression. No grain of sand upon this great shore could think of itself as anything but the shore itself. Never self-awareness until the soul is allowed by the Manu, a word which means literally the elder brothers, but we would point as well that the Manu also are the lords of karma. Not quite sure who the lords of karma are, whether they're the ancients of days or what they match up with according to Urantia terminology yet. Anyway, thus, according to the direction of the Manu, the Elohim, 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 the Manu, the The expression within this child of God are allowed to have the experience of moving away from the one great singular body to project itself into matter for the purpose of becoming eventually both self-aware and aware of self only as an expression of the singular whole. Now, a lot of these concepts are mirrored in the Urantia Book. Concepts of having a singular identity to varying degrees, collective consciousness to varying degrees. What's left out of the Urantia account is this sequence of events where there is a before time for us, if you will, a time when we were part of some kind of collective, like a part of God, more of a collective intelligence, not as much of a singular personality. And then we decided apparently to project ourselves into man. How the animals had eventually evolved to the point where they could support spiritual intelligence, and thus man, as man, came into being. And this is all straight out of the Urantia Book as well. But what it doesn't talk about is entities projecting themselves there. It only talks about it from the perspective of our spiritual intelligence growing from there due to the ministry of several celestial entities and our thought adjuster working on the fabric of mind. And it's going to get into this more in this reading, but it really seems like the adjuster, the father fragment, the piece of God within us, is what the deep trance channels call the self. It really does seem like that. And you know, I'll get to why it seems like that later, but then you can start to see how there's this radically different perspective, because the Urantia Book does not treat that as the self. The Urantia Book treats it as a separate entity from us until we are fused with it, when we reach that level of enlightenment. And then we've undergone adjuster fusion, and then we're a singular consciousness. But isn't it interesting? And it kind of makes sense, because supposedly when you get readings like this, the main entity you're communicating with is the superconscious mind, the higher self, the thought adjuster, the father fragment. So if that's who you're talking to, from its perspective, that is the identity. And when you can begin to see, in a way, how you would get such radically different perspectives. Even to the point of having different definitions of who we are, of what our seat of identity is, from the higher self perspective. We are undergoing countless lifetimes of reincarnation. We decided to come in here. We came from God, and we're eventually returning to God, which matches the Urantia Book account totally. You know, the father fragments come from God. They associate themselves with these evolutionary mortals and go with them along their entire journey towards paradise, and along the way they undergo adjuster fusion with those entities. You know, they're all the way, they're working their way back to God. So, you know, that all completely hangs together. And I could talk about that forever, right? But let's continue. There's so much stuff here. Then, as souls are called from this one great body of the child of God, called the Manu, into the opportunity for expression, then at that time the soul has its first glimpse of the earth, not only as one portion of the whole, not just as another grain of sand in the great body, but the soul begins to see the separation between the grains of sand, and begins to see the spectacular image of the universe, the glittering and most awe-inspiring experience that one could behold. And the soul, even then, has quite a strain to gain any sense of the enormity, the complexity, the incredible beauty and wonder of this creation of God. But the soul is called aside from the great body for the purpose of allowing that soul to participate in co-creation with God, because creation is not nearly complete. All this harmonizing terrifically with Urantia Book. This is the chosen seventh day in which the one child, within whom are the multitude of children of God, and it is the decision, the mandate of the great Creator that each facet of his being, each father fragment, shall work with him in exploring and discovering all possible concepts, all possible structures, all possible expressions of creation which might under any circumstances exist. Not only does this stuff harmonize beautifully with the Urantia Book, it complements it and expands the portrayal, clarifies, if you will, the portrayal to a great degree. In lots of different ways. I'm not sure what all I should talk about now. I mean, on the surface there are lots of differences, but I already outlined how one way I really think those harmonize with the planning. You know, this idea of the adjuster looking down on the earth and deciding to inhabit one of these beings, etc., etc. Anyway, it goes on to say, and this one great Creator, of whom all the sands of the seashore, all the stars of the heavens are a part of that body, this Creator, does not recognize at all the relationships which individuals on this planet have chosen to refer to as good and evil. The Creator, Source, is only interested in the myriad expressions of which his children are capable, including those that from the perspective of an individual on this planet might be seen as loathsome, evil, destructive, and such. These are seen by the Source as the growing process of souls exploring all their possibilities and in their maturity making decisions as to what is not in the best interest of higher creation. And in such a manner, the Father, the Source, sees the growth of his children. I mean, I think the wording was kind of clumsy there, but you get the intent. And the idea is that everything is valid, everything is fair game, it's all good, everything is good. And of course, obviously, some things involve hurting others, stepping on others' toes, things that don't work for the greater good. The whole idea is this is an evolutionary process. We have to hit rock bottom first and work our way up. We gradually work our way through the school of hard knocks to where we experientially have it as a part of our being that the expressed will of God is the best way. We feel it is the best way because we've been through all these things, not because we're being told that, and so therefore we just go along with it. I mean, it's familiar territory to me because this is what I really latched onto from the Casey perspective and have been here for like about 10 years or more. And yeah, so I don't know, it might strike a lot of you as odd, but such is the perspective. And could it really match up with the Urantia Book? I mean, the Urantia Book seems very clear in terms of good and evil, but of course it's very clear in terms of evolution as well. This evolutionary process and how valuable and necessary it is and what it's really about. And it's really the same thing as being portrayed here. Anyway, now with that concept, it goes on to say, now with that concept in place, we will refer again to the fact that this particular soul, called out of the great mass to experience self-awareness, first beheld the earth and influenced activities in the earth, along with the hosts of Elohim, continuing creation on the earth. And this sounds a lot like life carriers or something, according to the Urantia Book, which is weird. Anyway, this activity was without a sense of separation, it says. You know, really harmonizing with it accounts we have from elsewhere that this is unique, this earth is unique because we have free will, because we have separateness. We experience the illusion of separateness, of separation here, of separate identity, so that being an elevated individual or working with them, we do have a more collective existence. And also that many of these elevated creatures that started out being created in perfection can reach a point where they are allowed to start at the bottom rung and work up through as evolutionary mortals which is clearly portrayed in the Urantia book. So perhaps this person was somewhat unique, but perhaps not. Perhaps they're just talking about adjusters, the higher self. Anyway, it goes on. Then, as many other souls have chosen to do, this soul made a choice to project itself into physical form, material matter, the result of creative action, but which in itself is alive and always active, implying that it's not the only way that souls have another choice. Now, certainly adjusters do, father fragments do, because they interact with other beings in different ways. They can have independent existences, attain their own personal identity later on, I believe, depending on context, have their own kind of existence. So it just really seems like the word soul, as used here, is almost synonymous with the thought adjuster, the father fragment, in the Urantia terminology. Further confusing things, of course. Anyway, it goes on. Now, when a soul enters into such a body, a vehicle, the sensory faculties of that animal form become the primary means of gaining information. Whereas before the experience in the body, the information came and appeared as realizations without the use of senses. Now, the Urantia book says we will have hundreds of senses once we get just to the next rung, the mansion worlds, or 20 different senses or something like that. Not even using senses, maybe being an attribute of a raw adjuster, I don't know. Now, another important difference, the Urantia book clearly indicates that a thought adjuster of an evolutionary mortal who does not survive, that adjuster of course does continue, but it says it's very clear about stating that that adjuster never comes back to the same planet, the same evolutionary world. It'll go to another one. Now, that's something that clearly could have been added by Sadler, or, I fully believe, of course, that the celestial entities would not put an outright lie down on paper, even if it was for the sake of hiding information. They just wouldn't say something. So when they do say a statement like that, if it really was straight from the horse's mouth, then we have some more explaining to do, possibly. Although it's not a tremendous difficulty in a way, because the deep trance channels clearly indicate that there are lots and lots of different worlds all over the place where this evolutionary process, where souls can grow and learn and benefit from things, and that on many of them we are not incarnated as we are here. In fact, on most of them, I think the deep trance channels say we are not incarnated as we are here, which does harmonize quite well with the Urantia portrayal of the different types of worlds, and the evolutionary worlds being on the bottom rung, some of those being material worlds. I'm not even sure if the book indicates that all evolutionary worlds are material, but anyway, more on that later. But an interesting perspective about getting kind of frozen in the flesh here and being subject to the illusion of self, becoming subject to it. A different count of a beginning, kind of in the Urantia book, where we all begin right here in this lifetime. Perhaps. It's interesting that the Urantia teaching mission channels, when pressed about do we choose our parents, do we plan ahead for this lifetime, they just said they chose not to comment at the time. They didn't even say yes or no. They didn't want to talk about it. So, and I haven't checked recently to see if there's any new information on that kind of stuff, but that was as of a few months ago. So, obviously, there's some important unwritten stuff that has not been revealed as part of the Urantia fifth epochal revelation or whatever. Still lots of room for an account like this. Anyway, it goes on. Thus the soul began to explore sensory experience of different types, at least 5 different experiences of the environment, I guess one for each sense, which were opportunities of the soul to experience other facets of creation. And in the use of those senses and the experience of the appetites, there is such a need of the occupying soul to manage such a body and process information coming in through the five senses, that in almost every instance, the higher senses fade into the background, appearing only as influences, ideas, not discriminatory, not clear, not easily accessed above the brain's busy processing of information through the five senses. And these deep trance channels are pretty much unanimous, saying that our abilities of psychic awareness and perception are the birthright of mankind. They're as much a part of us as anything else. It's just that they're basically atrophied, and that really does make sense. You know, it's like as far as the beast animalistically is concerned, we're locked in a three-dimensional reality, and whether or not we're going to jump off a cliff or get eaten by a tiger is much more important than psychic impressions from the beyond that aren't really going to impact whether we starve to death or don't, or you know, that kind of a thing. So you can kind of see how the immediate needs of the environment start to dictate the consciousness, the conscious focused, conscious awareness, and how the path of least resistance then would be to just get locked into the three-dimensional reality and have the complete illusion of separateness, the complete illusion of self. So, it goes on. Now in that manner a soul becomes captured or imprisoned within a beast, and it becomes then the work of the elder brethren, those who have been through this experience before and have awakened again to higher consciousness. It becomes their work to take such beasts and expose them to stimuli that will remind the consciousness within the beast that there is a divine order, that there is an expression of the divine, that there is an indwelling presence that is in fact the true intrinsic soul itself, thought adjuster. But this soul within the beast lies completely dormant in terms of activity or influence, because it has entered the beast only as an observer. Sound like the thought adjuster, higher self? To observe and see and learn of the functions, the activities, the experiences which are possible upon this plane, this school, this earth. You know, it doesn't say the word thought adjuster in the pulse. I'm just putting that in there where I really think it's clear that's what it's talking about. And feel free to beat me up for my interpretation. I mean, but it's a very thoughtfully considered interpretation. I mean, I have read, I don't know how many hundreds of pages of these readings and the Urantia book, and pored over it and wrestled back and forth the ideas, struggling with matching these things up. And it seems, the more I do it, the clearer it seems that what they're talking about here is the father fragment, as much a part of us as anything else. But from the point of view of a father fragment, the father fragment is the self. Makes sense to me. And by the way, important difference, according to all the deep trance channels, that adjuster, that father fragment, inhabits many different individuals in series, in sequence. Apparently never two at the same time. Don't quote me on that, but apparently never two at the same time. In this plane and in other, you know, in this earth and other realms, other worlds. Which is definitely, if not a direct contradiction of the portrayal of the Urantia book, definitely an expansion of the portrayal of the Urantia book. And again, I definitely feel it's not outside the realm of possibility that every time those things were talked about, Sadler definitely went through and added or subtracted parts indicating, changing it to clearly indicate that adjusters never came back, deliberately avoiding any references of reincarnation. And hey, how do we know? You know, for all I know, papers 45 and 46 were about reincarnation and or some other ones, you know, and Sadler just axed those and stuck in some lame ones about science and whatnot, or whatever. Pick your favorite scenario. For all we know, it could have happened. Now, I definitely am not the absolute expert on everything that is known about the tampering with the Urantia book. I haven't read the Sherman diaries that have come out, or even all the, there's just a lot of material out there that you can use to piece stuff together. I've read quite a bit of the stuff online from whoever it is that has the timeline of the Urantia movement. It has all these different letters and papers and stuff put up online from these individuals and writings of Harold Sherman and stuff. I've read quite a bit. One of the things that really sticks in mind is when Harold Sherman was wondering if they had papers about, I don't know what he was asking about, like psychic ability or something, or some topic, and that wasn't covered. And this is while they were still like compiling the book or whatever. And he was asking the secretary about it, and the secretary's like, "Oh, well, why don't you write a paper like that, and then we'll just submit it to the what would he always call them? You had the material son and daughter, Adam and Eve, and then the invisible people, the midwayers. Yeah, midwayers. So I don't know. I say, oh, it's the midwayers. I hear the midwayers talking, and they'd be like, oh, yeah, well, let's just have the midwayers look at it, and they'll tell us if they approve the paper or not. Meaning, and Sherman was just aghast at this, as well as he should be. That the obvious implication is that this kind of thing had been going on. That people would come there with papers they just wrote themselves, and then they would either get approved or not, and then presumably just, the whole paper would just be like shoved in there. It's like, so all I'm trying to get at here, I'm not trying to erode anybody's faith in the Urantia book. Well, maybe I am for a certain perspective, but just let me be clear. I'm confident the Urantia book is valid, especially after hearing the readings from the teaching mission where they're talking about how they're very happy with the book. Yes, there was tampering, but still they're happy with the book. So I'm confident that it has largely succeeded in its goal as being a much, much greater revelation, concrete revelation than we've ever had before. But also that it is a largely imperfect document. That there was significant tampering going on. And so it's by no means a stretch of the imagination to consider that there perhaps could have been whole sections of the book dealing with people's psychic abilities and that whole side of ourselves, dealing with past lives and reincarnation and this whole system and how it worked into everything. It's by no means a stretch of imagination to think that those whole sections could have been just torn out, and every single reference to such things deliberately piecemeal taken out of the book, and all such passages altered just to hide the existence of things that were deemed distasteful by Sadler, things that dealt with, that were known that he did not like, anything dealing with things that were psychic or paranormal, past lives, reincarnation, anything like that. So to say that the Urantia book has a stance, or a clear stance, saying there was no reincarnation or aren't past lives, that's not part of our story. That doesn't hold much water in the light of the fact that those were the prejudices of the man who was known to have altered the book. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Without knowing specifically what alterations were made, we just have to piece things together. Now, granted, it'd be freaking awesome if we could have like a Cottrell reading and he would sit here and tell us, oh yeah, there was this paper and that paper, and here's what happened, here's what was taken out, here's what was added. I mean, that would just rock. But I strongly suspect that you wouldn't get such clear information for whatever reason, whether it's difficult to obtain by psychic means, or entities do not want to reveal it, or such tampering on that scale didn't occur, or whatever. Anyway, so carrying on. And this whole idea of the elder brethren helping us out since we're trapped in the beast, it sounds like your spirit team. It sounds like all these people that are supposed to be working with you. It just really jives well with the other material from the Urantia movement. So, this observer self, it says, is the one and only true intrinsic self. It is the soul itself. It is the identity. It does not change from one experience to another, one lifetime to another. It is one and the same. It has always existed and always will. It is incapable of experiencing death. Now, if you strictly jive that with the Urantia portrayal, the only part of us that is not capable of oblivion, of termination, is the adjuster. The only part of us that did not have a beginning was the adjuster, the father fragment. That's the part that came from God. That's the part that even if we are not saved and we choose to be extinguished according to the Urantia portrayal, the only portion that still continues on, other than our record that is stuck in where records are kept, the only portion that continues on is the father fragment, is the adjuster. And I mean, you can't get any more clear than this. It's so clear that that is what it's talking about as our identity. It goes on, and this observer self, this witness gathering the experience, exploring the nature of creation, will not assert itself within the beast except in certain important circumstances. Sometimes, though not always, this observer self, intrinsic self, the real and true self, may intervene in survival-threatening situations relating to the beast. More often, the soul, the intrinsic self, responds to any expression of the divine expression of the heart of God that manifests itself within its presence. You know, like a resonance thing. You see the will of God or manifestation of a divinity expressed in your presence. The adjuster within you rises up and resonates with that. Seems to be what it's indicating. And he's saying this for a reason, because for this lady, he's going on to talk about what she's about. And he says, and such expressions include music as harmony and attunement. Such expressions include beauty in the myriad forms in which it occurs. Such expressions are spoken of by the Apostle Paul in his writing of the Epistle to the Romans in the first chapter, in which he refers to so many expressions of life, so many expressions of God in the environment around every soul, that it leaves any particular soul without an excuse for failing to recognize and respond to and join with this omnipotent expression of God. Now, in the case of this soul who sits before us, we see the Manu accepting the soul for building its awareness, for recalling, for sharing the awareness of the intrinsic self with the rest of the body, so that the entire being becomes aware of itself as an expression of God. So anyway, this reading really goes on. I don't think I'll finish the whole thing, because he goes on to talk about how her expression of music can really resonate people's awareness of the adjuster, the father fragment within, and et cetera, et cetera. But that part of the beginning where he was talking about the identity being the higher self in such clear language. I don't know. I think that's really significant, because it in a way it clarifies a lot why there would be differences from the portrayal in the Urantia book. And then it's also really interesting then how the Urantia book takes this different perspective where it treats the adjuster as a separate entity, the father fragment as a separate entity, and then talks about our soul as being formed by the activity of the adjuster on our mind as it goes through this experience, or something like that, on the fabric of our mind. which sounds a lot like that glass getting filled up. You know, that reading that Matthew Loon did for me, where he's talking about the soul can be viewed as a glass that gets filled up with experience with each lifetime, a little more and a little more, at least the good beneficial parts of that experience, which directly parallels the Urantia book talking about how the father fragment, the adjuster, gains only the experience that was beneficial, and that's the only thing it has memory of from previous lifetimes. Sounds like exactly the same thing. I don't know. I guess what I'm getting at is that all really seems to hang together, and so the Urantia book takes the perspective that our soul is something different, our identity is something different, and it's really talking to our self that has begun here in this lifetime. And I don't know, maybe it's an incredibly valuable perspective, because we definitely don't understand the beginning and end of this whole complicated issue of who we are and what we're about. So there could be great value, and according to the Urantia book, definitely is great value in this existence we have going here that started when we were born this time around, born here. This existence. The identity that started when we were born, and especially once we made our first moral decision and we got our adjuster around the time we were 5 years old, according to the Urantia book. And so there's this identity that we have growing as we go through life and make moral decisions in difficult circumstances, which apparently is what it's all about. It's not just that it's chalking up experience with the adjuster, it's that there is a self, our own self, and the Urantia book seems to indicate that the self that is in existence at the time, you know, that self, that soul belonging to a specific lifetime, that is in existence in that one lifetime where enlightenment is achieved. Now, according to the Urantia book, it's not required that you achieve adjuster fusion, it's just required that you reach this third cosmic circle, or the fifth kingdom, I think, according to the Vanatu teachings from Matthew Loon. You know, fifth from the bottom, third from the top, being that there's 7 of these levels, I guess. Those seem to really harmonize. But anyway, there's this level of awareness of spiritual growth that once you reach that, according to the Urantia book, you've achieved survival. And that if you don't achieve it in this lifetime, that there's ample opportunity for your identity here to still achieve it on the mansion worlds beyond. And so it's still probably okay, but there's just such tremendous value, it keeps saying, in doing it here, doing it all here, getting all the way here. And these deep trance channels seem to try to keep saying the same thing, right? They keep trying to encourage people to join with their higher self to achieve enlightenment. And it really seems to be talking about adjuster fusion within this lifetime, which the Urantia book says is definitely possible, and that does happen. It's just not very common, especially at this stage in our development as a planet, as an environment. So again, 2 radically different perspectives, not necessarily contradictory, directly contradictory perspectives, but radically different, and enough so that it really gives you pause again and again and again. But I guess what I'm trying to show here is I keep getting this glimpse, these hints that maybe the deep trance account is from the perspective of the father fragment, and the Urantia account of the self is from the perspective of the rest of us that's trying to fuse with that father fragment. And from one of those perspectives, you get past lives and reincarnation. From the other one, you do not. And fabulous, very interesting implications there, if both those are true. And I don't know, I feel confident that from some point of view, both of those are definitely true. There's just some gap filling to be done, you know, and that gap filling will involve a huge expansion of consciousness, I'm sure, which is what this is all supposed to be about, right? So, hopefully I didn't add to the confusion as much as I contributed to clarification of a very interesting topic, to me anyway, being that of what is the definition of our identity, what is all this stuff about having a piece of God in us, and what does that really mean? Are there such things as past lives? Did we choose this existence? What does it mean to be trapped here and to escape? And you know, hopefully a lot of things are more clear in that regard now than they may have been coming in, or at least, you know, definitely you should have more food for thought, regardless of which perspective you came from, or if you came from none of the above. Should be lots of interesting things to dig into. So sure, Paul Solomon's a great source, and of course the other Deep Trance channels are terrific. They have lots of information, this kind of stuff. Especially Edgar Casey, there's just mountains of material on this whole topic. And I'm sure if I had read it all, I would have even more of these questions answered. But I guess it's a nice problem to have. More information out there than we can master, and it keeps coming out new stuff every day. So share and enjoy.